So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar presented by Meirc Training and Consulting and discussing Introduction to Instructional Design. Now, just for the sake of introducing a little bit the company, allow me first to give you a brief view of the history of Meirc. It has been founded in Beirut 61 years ago. Its headquarters now is in Dubai since 1991, so it has been a long while that our company has been in the market offering the best learning solutions and consultancy services to all its clients around the region in English and in Arabic along lots of topics. In 2014, Meirc also established a division called Plus for specialty training that offers specialized industry-specific or function-oriented trainings, and its programs are facilitated and developed by leading subject matter experts around the globe. So maybe you ask, how come that a company for training and consulting has stood successful for 61 years so far, and it's all because we have took commitment to our 5 values for which we stand for, which are mastery, excellence, innovation, reliability, and certainly on top of all is client centricity. And offering webinars weekly for learning advocates and people who would like to continue on developing themselves is only one way of committing to being client-centric and offering everyone who likes to learn and develop themselves around the world an opportunity for a short session on the best and most futuristic topics, each in their own areas. So the areas that Meirc offer training and consultancy in are very wide and almost cover all aspects of business, from accounting to finance to contract management to HR and training, public relations, and special industry like oil and gas, pharmaceutical management, etc. So this is Meirc in short. Today our topic is related to HR, and that's why me, as a part of the HR and training team of Meirc Training and Consulting, will be today presenting this webinar as entitled Introduction to Instructional Design. My name is Rabih Rizk. I'm a management consultant with Meirc Training and Consulting, mainly specializing in leadership and HR. All my career since 2001 has been focused on training, talent development, learning and development in organization. And that's why instructional design is part of my expertise. So that's it. Without lots of more introduction, let's hit the road directly and talk a little bit about the topic itself. So what is instructional design? In fact, let me put it this way. When you work in learning and development in corporates and organizations, you're always pressured by management to make sure that when you invest in learning or in training, you do that with results in mind. No company at all is a learning center. So usually companies who seek profit do not teach their employees or provide them with learning just because learning is important. They want income generating learning. They want learning that has return on investment. And I'm sure that many of you have attended trainings, and in some instances, you couldn't translate this into a behavior or a project that could help improve your workplace. Now, having said that, we know that reaching this kind of, let me say, organizational frustration when you cannot generate return on investment on learning is challenging, especially for people who are in this organization and are responsible for connecting learners to learning centers. Usually they are called learning and development professionals, they are called HR professionals. and more they are challenged in offering learning solutions that are performance oriented. In other words, they contribute to the well-being of the organization. They contribute to the organization being more profitable, being faster, being smoother, being leaner, and certainly being more profitable. So, faced with these challenges, people in learning and development try always to innovate solutions to such kind of workplace problems. And for that, instructional design by itself as a concept is aiming to create what we call learning episodes. Now, what are learning episodes? They are learning opportunities created through a process called instructional design and aiming to generate a learning environment where the return on investment and the profitability of learning is highly guaranteed. So that's it. Certainly, what we're trying to do today is only an introduction to a very wide area of science in training and development that connects many aspects of learning, from learners, from teaching, from the technology itself, and many aspects that I'm very excited to share only an introduction with you, because we only have like 45 to 60 minutes to do that. So thank you again for joining. It's a real pleasure to see you interested in this. Please, at any point in time, if you have questions, feel free to write it down in the chat box, and we will try to answer the questions as much as we can. So, just before I continue, can you please confirm by typing yes that you can hear my voice clearly and you're on the go with our webinar so far? I'll just guide you through this by typing yes into the chat pod, and I hope you can. So Khalid has confirmed being able to listening to me. Thank you very much, Khalid, and welcome. A great pleasure having you here. I hope the others also would have the time to type in the chat box and inform us that they can hear us. We'll allow you a couple of seconds to do that, and then we'll continue with our webinar. So how about the others? Maybe you're finding some difficulty typing in the chat box. Okay, great. So let's go. So we introduced instructional design. We somehow defined instructional design. And for those of you who can, who are a little bit familiar with instructional design, they mostly hear about a process called the ADDIE process, or a framework for developing learning episodes. So what is ADDIE? In fact, ADDIE, although now is very famous for being a tool for instructional design, it was not conceived to be used in learning and development. It's a product development paradigm that can be used in any aspect because it's a thinking process. And the objective for the process, like as is the objective of any process, is to make sure that you facilitate the creation of learning episodes, which are by nature a complex solution. They are not straightforward solution, and that's why we need a rigorous process that can help us design such learning episode in a rigorous manner. Now, I'm sure that when you think about learning, you know that it is not always as rigid, and it might defy the fact that we have a process to design it. And here where comes the flexibility of the ADDIE framework, because all the steps feed each other, validate one another, and try to talk to each other in a synergetic manner in order to come up with the best solution. So certainly the process has 5 phases. You will see its generic phases in terms of thinking, but then when you start practicing ADDIE, you will have specific procedures, templates, and outcomes for each phase of these 5 phases that are directly related to generating learning episodes. So it's analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. These are the 5 steps of the most famous framework for developing instructions or learning episodes, which is called shortly ADDIE. So ADDIE itself describes a process which can be applied to instructional design in order to generate episodes of intentional learning. And it's very important to identify what we mean by intentional learning. Intentional learning is a context where the objectives of bringing people together into a learning environment are predefined. So you know them before people join. Now, maybe this is very obvious for you, but let me tell you that within any moment in life, there are opportunities for learning. You can learn anywhere, and this is unintentional. But in turn, when we talk about instructional design, we only focus as what we can aim for. That's why we call it intentional learning. Now, it's very important to understand the importance of the process and why ADDIE has been chosen and proven as a very effective framework for instructional design. Now, as we said, ADDIE was not dedicated for instructional design, but now is being applied for constructing performance-based learning. In other words, it's aiming for improving the performance of employees who attend learning interventions or participate into training and development initiatives in an organization. So mainly, we need to make sure that when we design these intentional learning episodes, they have to be student-centered. They have to be authentic. They have to inspire people, and they have to use every bit of our creativity to reach a better performance. And that's why ADDIE as a process is very innovative, and it can help you through a very rigorous process to come up with effective yet very creative learning episodes. So, as we said, ADDIE is only a guiding framework because learning is complex, and it's aiming to develop educational products. And here, what we aim to introduce are some fundamental processes, some common procedures, and mainly when you understand the full process, you will be able to also identify the deliverables that help you to come up with a learning episode, or simply let me call it informally, a training program. The process itself is very efficient because it helps guiding you through the complexity of developing learning products. It is interconnected as steps, and that's why every step feeds the other, and here it creates a synergy. Most importantly, ADDIE is very important as a process for instructional design because it unifies the ways of thinking, and it creates history that you can recall and you can build upon to enhance all the future products in terms of learning, in terms of performance-based learning that you are going to generate in your life in the organization. So, a very important note here is, when do we use instructional design to enhance performance? Now, if you have been in learning and development for a while, you might have experienced that anytime an employee has a problem in performance, management would say, most probably send them to training. Well, that's partly true, but this leads to a lot of frustration. Why? Because not every gap in performance is due to lack of training. And we all know that because we have sent people to training, we have registered to training ourselves just to know by the end of this training that our performance remained the same. So very shortly, when do we use instructional design to bridge performance gaps is as follows. When you have observable evidence that a desired performance is not being achieved, then you start asking yourself, would a learning episode bridge the gap and eliminate the performance discrepancy that is with this specific individual? However, to make sure that the learning episode will remove the performance discrepancy, you need to know that you use instructional design only when the competency of the individual can be increased through improved knowledge and skills. Maybe it's not very clear, so let me do it by the contrary side or by counter using the instructional design. In other words, when instructional design is not the answer for performance improvement. So imagine the scenario. A maintenance manager comes to tell you that I have an engineer that did not reach his KPIs for the first quarter. This is a performance gap. This is a discrepancy of performance where the desired outcome does not match the actual outcome. Before saying, yes, we need to send him to a preventative maintenance course and spend money on that or spend time and effort on that, you need to make sure to answer no to some questions. And by that, you will eliminate all the other chances or all the other risks that are causing the performance gap. So you need to ask, does the employee have all the information necessary to do the job? If the answer is yes, then you go to the next. Is the documentation or the document that this employee is following in terms of operating the maintenance in a certain plan, are there and correct? Yes. Then you go to the next question. Does he have job aids that help him perform well? If you say no, then before you send the employee to training, you provide them with job aid. And then you continue with the process. Is he receiving feedback on his performance? Does he have the permission to do the tasks or the authority to take decisions that will bridge this gap of performance? Otherwise, you go and change his job description. You do not you do not go and send him to training. Maybe you will need to re-engineer his job description. Maybe he's in the wrong department, or maybe he's not aware of the consequences of such a discrepancy in his performance. If his colleagues are getting the same results and no one has been sanctioned for a gap in performance, then why bother? So before going to design a learning episode and share it with a certain participant, you need to make sure that has received all these 8 factors before that. If all the answers here are yeses, then you move to design and instruction and make sure that when you design this and you deliver it the right way, you will be able to improve the performance of employees. Otherwise, it's going to be a very frustrating. Trust me, I've been there. And when you spend money on training people, you spend your time and effort on training your employees, but they do not benefit from that, then if you work in training and development, you are mainly responsible for this, and your KPIs, your own KPIs, you will see them falling down. So, some main elements, some components that describe the environment where instructional design happens, and some guiding beliefs are in due right now. So we need to make sure that we understand the components of a learning space. Well, what is a learning space? A learning space is where the instructional design or where the learning happens. And a learning space in the case of instructional design needs to be intentional, as we said before, and needs to be participant-centered. And as you see in this visual, participant is in the middle of all the instructional design environment. It's in the middle of the learning space. And within the learning space, there is the instructor, there are the peers who are learning as well. There is the content that you need to share, and also there is the medium that you will use in order to deliver your learning episode. However, don't forget that all this is happening in a certain bigger context, be it a geographical context or an organizational context. It could be a cultural context as well. And certainly, the learning episode progresses along a timeline and ideally progresses to reach certain goals, which we will talk about later. So this is the learning space. Another thing is what we call a teacher learning continuum. Now, we said that the learning space needs to be student-centered or participant-centered. Why? Because you need to make sure that the student or the participant, by the end of the learning episode, will be able to improve his performance. And let me just stop to welcome Imad, who has joined us in saying good morning. Good morning, Imad. I hope you are doing well today. Thank you for joining our webinar. So this is another guiding belief, is that you need to move your learning space from being teacher dependent to become teacher independent and make it all revolving around the student. This is a very important aspect of instructional design, that otherwise your product, which is the learning episode that will be the fruit of ADDIE, will not make sense for the participant. And by that, we mean it will not be able to deliver an improvement in terms of performance. So another guiding principle or a guiding belief is that the learning has to happen in an action manner. And that's why ADDIE or instructional design adopts an action learning theory to deliver each learning episode. Now, that's why we try to be very loyal to the implementation context, not to the learning context. Let me say this in informal words. Now, I'm sure you have attended some trainings, and in these trainings, you needed to do some practice. Now, this practice can be a small sample that is not challenging for participant, and that's why the potential of performance improvement is very little. While if you can provide a practice environment that is authentic, in other words, you can emulate the working space into the learning space, then you will create an environment of learning that will inspire participants to take this to back to the job, and that's why it will enhance their performance. So in a visual, you will need to make sure that your learning space displays high fidelity to the workplace. It has to be very similar to the workplace. Otherwise, you're creating a situational learning that is not going to optimally help the participant to think about real scenarios happening back on the job and be able to give you the feedback, improve their competency, and based on that, be able to bridge the performance gap or eliminate the performance discrepancy. Now, before we move to our last part of this webinar, which is more on the practical side, do you have any questions? Is there anything that was not clear? Anything that you would like me to emphasize a little bit just before we move forward? Okay, so no question. Seems further so far we are doing very good. So let me move to something very important, which is a little bit more on the implementation side of ADDIE, which is we're gonna go into the 5 steps of ADDIE and make sure that we know what is the objective of each step, what are the common procedures that we need to implement in every step, and what is the outcome or the deliverable or deliverables that we need to present by the end of this step. So this way you will understand how the ADDIE process is a product development, and in our case is a learning product development. So you're designing a learning episode, which is a product dedicated to help participants learn and improve their performance. So let me remind you, ADDIE stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. So what are the concepts behind each step of those? The first step, which is analyze, is starting by making sure we identify the real reasons for the gap in performance. As we spoke earlier, you cannot just assume that a learning episode or a training or a workshop is the solution to all performance gaps. This is illogical, and this is going to be very frustrating on the long run. You will see that this process requires discipline in terms of following the step-by-step guideline to instructional design. This process is requiring from you to be detail oriented because you're working as an architect for learning. But when you do that, you will make sure that people who participate in your learning episode are highly benefiting, and your organization is highly benefiting. And by the way, you are positioning yourself as a partner of success for your organization, not only a person that is coordinating training activities or providing some fun environment where people change some mood because they move from their offices into a training venue. So analyze is about identifying the real causes for the performance gap. Now, in the design phase, you need to verify the desired performance and you need to start thinking about the appropriate testing methods. How you are going to test whether there is a performance improvement. And remember, it needs to be observable. When you work in an organization, you only aim for tangible results. You have to make friends with numbers. You have to make sure that when you talk to top management, you talk in a language that they appreciate and in a language that they understand and it's beneficial for them. So that's why you know that management talks about money, talk about speed, talk about quality, talk about customer satisfaction, talk about higher engagement, they talk about less absenteeism, more focus on the job, less mistakes. So you need to make sure that your desired performance is written in this language. And now the step that mostly all people who work in training focus on, and unfortunately they start with by skipping analyze and design. That's why they take a drifted route and reach some unpleasant places in terms of learning. Step number 3, which is the develop stage, is where you generate and validate your learning resources. Whether it's information or it's case studies or it's a role play or a certain, you choose the medium, whether is it online or a webinar or a workshop or a lab training, whatever the medium that you choose, it needs to be first aligned with the analysis and design. And that's the importance of the process, because develop is getting fed information by analyze and design. And here you start by identifying the learning resources and checking the learning resources that you have. Maybe start to think about the budget or the money that you're gonna spend here in terms of offering this learning episode. And step 4 is the implementation. What do we mean by implementation? Don't mistake this step with the actual delivery of the learning episode. Here we are designing the implementation, okay? We are not implementing the learnings episode. So that's why in this step, you prepare the learning environment, you start engaging the students, not in the learning, but to the learning. You start communicating with them, you start sharing the objectives, you start handling logistics. Everything here is happening before the learning takes place. And this is a common mistake that people make when they look at ADDIE. They think that the first 3 steps are the preparation and the next 2, the step 4 is the delivery, and step 5 happens after the training. In fact, all these steps are happening before the learning episode is delivered. And the step 5, which is the evaluation, is the step that is happening all the time, but mainly is formally done by the end of the preparation to learning. In other words, you need to know how to assess the quality of the instructional product. You need to assess the processes, and you need to make sure that you know that you can provide feedback in an observable and tangible manner about how far you reached the instructional objectives that you had. So these are the concepts. Some common procedures related to each step are here, as you can see. In the analysis, some of the very important steps is the validation of the performance gap. Make sure that you confirm the intended audience, and because somehow you analyze a certain audience and then you end up with a different audience in the conference room or in training workshop. You need to make sure that you start exploring potential delivery systems, and you need to make sure that you have a project management plan. What is the main deliverable for the analysis phase is a document called analysis summary that is the fruit of all these 6 common procedures that we just described. Step number 2, which is the design, is making sure that you have a task inventory for the learning episode. You need to make sure that you have well-written performance objectives. You need to make sure that you have your testing strategies and your strategies to calculate the return on investment. The output or the document that you generate by the end of this phase is what we call a design brief. These 2 documents or these 2 outcomes of the first steps will feed the development stage, which is stage number 3, and will help you come up with a product that takes advantage and leverages all the learning resources that you have in hand and will boost your creativity in delivering a learning episode that is highly beneficial and right on target. The steps that are, or the procedures that are commonly coupled with the development stage is generating the content, developing the supporting media, making sure that you have guidance for the student and for the teacher slash instructor slash trainer, and you need to have a pilot testing just before you launch your product. Think about learning products just as any product. The mobile phone that you have in your hands, any app that you use, any dish that you order in a restaurant is tested several times before it is launched, and this is also need to be happening in our learning industry. The outcome of the development stage is a document showing all the learning resources in preparation for the implementation phase, which will give me the implementation strategy. In the implementation, the main 2 items are preparing the teacher by developing a teacher guide, making sure that the teacher is familiar with the content, making sure that you choose the right people to deliver, etc., and preparing the student in terms of logistics, in terms of transportation, in terms of technology, the medium that they are using, and everything. The evaluation phase is very straightforward. You have already designed your evaluation criteria all across the 4 phases. You need to make sure that your tools for evaluation are ready, and you need to know how are you going to conduct the evaluations. Now, it's very important to know that you cannot start thinking about evaluating learning after the learning physically happens. It's gonna be too late. You're gonna be reverse engineering your learning. You're gonna be justifying rather than evaluating, and it's gonna be a guessing game in this scenario that is gonna make you lose your credibility as people who work in training and development. And that's why, as you can see, the main outcome of the evaluate step is called the evaluation plan. It's not the actual evaluation. Somehow you need to make sure that you have a dashboard for instructional design that helps you make sure that you are measuring the impact of your learning episode. Now, does this mean that you are going to get a perfect outcome and this learning episode is absolutely going to bridge the gap of performance that we discussed earlier? No, absolutely not, because it depends on the learner, it depends on the context, it depends on the timeline that you are working in, and it depends on so many variables that you can control, but you cannot make sure that you 100% make it work in in the favor of the outcome of the learning episode. However, by that kind of thorough preparation, you are mostly sure that you will be able to deliver a learning episode that is not only beneficial, but it's a product that gets better as time goes by And again, going back to the smartphone scenario, as your operating system is continuously upgraded because you're giving feedback to the product developer, as instructional designer, you need to benefit from the ADDIE process and gather feedback from each step, evaluate the process, the medium, the teacher, the student, even the way you wrote your learning objective and your performance objectives, so that you enhance the product, you offer a better product, and you make sure that this product is aiming for increasing the performance of participant, and by that being able to help your organization reach their objective in highly efficient way. So that's it for our webinar. I'd like to thank you very much for your attendance. Just before we go, we're gonna allow some time for some of your questions. So please feel free to type your question in the chat box. Just if anything was not clear, if you have something in mind that you would like to discuss, please feel free to do that. I would be more than happy to answer your questions. So I've seen that someone was typing, so we'll allow some time for you to type your question. Okay, in the meantime, while I give you the opportunity to type, for those of you who would like to practice this process and make sure they have hands-on practice workshop and being able to become a certified instructional designer, I would like to invite you to attend our upcoming certification, which is happening twice this year, once in June and another time in September. You can check all the information and check with our consultants on how you can register to this course. I just sent you the link for the course on the chat box, and I hope you you can join us in this very practical certification newly launched by Meirc and offered through our team of subject matter experts. Okay, so if someone would like to ask anything, just give me a sign that you're typing. Otherwise, in 30 seconds, we're gonna close this webinar. Again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. It has been a great pleasure. I wish you a great remainder of the day and a great weekend ahead. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Meirc.com